space in March. But like all of you at home, we are adapting. So if we have any technical snafus along the way, I just ask that you be a little forgiving and just let us know in the comments what you're experiencing. I am just really excited that we're still getting a chance to talk about this really incredible book. Tonight's event will include a conversation between myself and Bess, and at around 7:30, I will ask Bess some of your questions. So please start submitting them now in the comment section and throughout the event. Hi, Bess, how's it going?
Hi, Amina, I'm doing well. How are you? Oh, I'm doing well is wrong. I'm not. I'm bad.
I mean, I'm just doing. I am really excited that you are here today. I'm excited that you've written this book. And, to start, I would love it if maybe you could pick a passage or two to read to us tonight.
Sure, I would love to. The great thing about this book tour has been I've been reading passages from this book to various bookstores through Zoom events by myself. So I've just been a crazy person talking to myself in this room, and I'm so glad I'm here with you. And I don't have to keep an imaginary conversation going in my head. This feels great. Just thank you so much, Amina, for doing this. It means a lot. And everyone who's watching is certainly just watching to see you. So apologies for reading from this book. The book has elements that are sad and elements that are hopefully funny. And I think to start things off, we could begin on a lighthearted note. And I can read to you from a passage of Voice when my then boyfriend and I went on a camping trip and cross-country skiing trip with his parents. I guess front story to this is this boyfriend is now my husband and father of my child, so it worked. Without much more ado, here is phone call December 2011. Bessie, Grandma. Bess, thank God in heaven I got you. You haven't left for Yosemite Park? No, we're packing. We're about to get in the car. What's up? You're going to be freezing. It's freezing there. I know. I've packed a lot of warm layers, and I'll be fine. I'll be inside. No, you won't. You'll be outside. Your mother says you're cross-country skiing. Yes, Charlie's family really likes to cross-country ski. I don't understand it. It's a ridiculous thing to do. It's not skiing. It's shuffling. It's fun. It's being outdoors, and it's not actually that hard. We practiced in Maine on a golf course. But you're not going to be on a golf course. One fall and you snap your leg and you're lying there in the middle of the wilderness and you can't get up, surrounded by Charlie's family. And how's that going to look? They take you outside for 1 second and you're belly up in a ditch. Charlie led outdoor wilderness trips for kids at a camp for 5 summers. I couldn't be with anyone more prepared for disaster. You're not some 10-year-old small. Charlie, will you tell my grandma that I'm not going to die in Yosemite? And this is my husband's only line in this book. I'm not getting involved in this. Charlie says everything's going to be fine, and he's very prepared. I thought you were worried about me being cold. Can't I be worried about more than one thing? Why don't they take you someplace normal, even normal skiing, somewhere with a hotel you can sit in? They like roughing it, being in nature, because they don't come from suffering. They've never chased mice around the attic with a broomstick and survived on $40 a week. I thought it was $45 a week. It was enough to starve. Please, just, you know what's roughing it? Lying on a straw bed with meningitis. And the only medication we can afford is cod liver oil from the Italian neighbor whose son got his hand caught in a meat grinder. Grandma, I think I'm going to be fine. Does your jacket have a lining? My jacket has a lining. Bring a hat. Voicemail 1 day later. Bessie, Your grandfather says there are brown bears in Yosemite, and they've become domesticated because the tourists are giving them food. But if they come up to you and you don't have any food, guess who they're going to eat? But they're not the grizzly bear. It's already too late. I'm being serious, Bessie. You must be careful. Phone call 2 days later. Grandma, I got your voicemail. I barely have reception. I'm standing in a field. Bessie, thank God. I talked to Charlie and all the bears are hibernating. That's a myth. They wake up and they eat. The chances of me being attacked by a bear are extremely small. Speaking of animals, tomorrow we're riding horses. Horses are vegetarians. Oh, Bessie, oh my. What did I say? Have I told you about your mother's friend, Lisa Belsky? Yes, the woman who didn't wear a helmet. She was on her honeymoon in the south of France, and she and her new husband thought it would be a good idea to take a romantic ride on horseback through some vineyard or other. And they were riding along, and your friend's mother, Lisa's horse, got spooked. Who knows why? Maybe there was a bee. And the horse tosses her off, and she landed on her head, and she was paralyzed immediately. And then do you know what happened? What happened? Her husband abandoned her for a stewardess. And that's the passage.
I mean,
that's my grandma.
Let's get into it. Your the book Nobody Will Tell You This But Me is an as told to memoir. It's also the story of your grandmother, Bobby Bell, in your words. Can you just tell me a little bit about how you came to write the book?
Sure. I was very, very close with my grandmother, as evidenced by these voicemails and phone calls, the constant line of communication. When my grandma died in 2017, I had to deliver a eulogy at her funeral. And I couldn't figure out what to say. I had a few drafts of bad, either who she was or what she meant to me, which kind of felt like the task I was presented with. And so in order to really do that, to deliver what I felt would be a good tribute to her, I just decided to do her eulogy as her and give basically a reading of a voicemail that she left me. And I did that. I stood up there on Martha's Vineyard at her funeral, and I read a voicemail that's in the book. It was about her flying up to New York City, where I grew up, to take care of me when I was a baby. And she would fly back down to Florida a few days a week. And she did that when my mom went back to work when I was a few weeks old. And I told this, I read this voicemail. Synagogue was laughing and looking at me as if they were recognizing her. And I think it was then that I realized, okay, I can channel this voice. I can take the kernel of something, which was a voicemail, make it a longer thing and capture Bobby. And that led to the book.
I love this so much because you incorporate a lot of these, the remembered phone calls and conversations that you have with Bobby Bell. How long had you been kind of thinking about telling the story after she passed?
I had been thinking of telling the story for a very long time. I wrote a book when I was 8 years old called The Life Story of Bobby Bell that I have here in my office. I can show it to the screen in a bit. My grandma sort of loomed large for me and was this legendary figure, this glamorous, caustic, witty, truth-telling woman who was this sort of sun in my life and that I orbited. And when she died, I decided to write this book to bring her back to me. And the way that I grieved was also the way that I wrote. I would sort of and write our conversations and voicemails, because I missed her and I needed to hear her voice again. And that ended up being very cathartic for me as a granddaughter, and also very productive as a writer. I found that once I was channeling her and recreating our conversations and recreating her voice, um, it flowed out pretty naturally. It was a writing assignment that didn't feel like an assignment. It just materialized on the page really, really readily for me.
And you interview a lot of your family members for this. I mean, obviously they all went along with it or you wouldn't have a book, but I'm just like wondering how those conversations were, especially probably with your mom.
Yeah. So the only family members that I spoke to for this book, well, there were three. Was my mother and my grandfather, Bobby's husband, and my mom's cousin Jeannie Otis. And the my mom was a primary source for this book. She and I were on the phone at all hours as I was writing. I would literally call her and be like, how old was Davy how old was Davy when Jesse was born? Or the twins, did Leo go to classes to law school, or so she was sort of my fact-checking resource. Despite all of that, she didn't read the book until maybe 2 months ago. She refused to read any of it, and tried and couldn't a few times. And so her relationship to the book and to the process of me writing the book were very different. Even though she was super game and helpful and a repository of memory and knowledge about my grandma during the writing, this was not a book that she was excited to read. She picked up an early version of the manuscript and put it down and said, it was super dramatic. My son was an infant. I was like, Mom, I'm sending in the second pass. Just please read it. The lawyers are asking you to read it. You have to read it. And she picks it up and she put it down and just went, I can't, this is her. And I was like, all right. But now once she read it after I was like, no, legally you do have to read it. Otherwise we'll be on Jerry Springer. This is not going to be a good family situation. She did, and she was quite proud of, to my face, she loved it, and was proud of it, and was very pleased with how it ended up. My grandpa Hank, who's in the book, and I have been talking a lot recently. He's quarantined in Florida, where they lived. He's alone, and this is a really tough time for him. But knowing that the world is falling in love with the love of his life right now is so heartening for him. He and I FaceTimed with my son the other day, and he thanked me for the book, which was really very emotional. That was very emotional for me. But he was also just so excited that what did he say? He was so excited that that now they get it. Like now everyone gets it. It's sort of like he sees other people seeing what he has seen his whole life, which is a very comforting feeling for him. And I think especially in a time of loneliness and isolation, it makes him feel connected to people outside of his apartment. He didn't read the book until its final product, until it was actually published. But the recordings that I have of him telling his story, and the story that in the book is called The Chair That Wobbled, basically how he conned his way into a real estate development career, and then professorship at Columbia, even though he does not have a graduate degree. Him telling those stories, one day I will find something to do with the recordings. They're so much better than what's in the book. They're really good.
I love this. I also am just always curious about people who write memoirs like this, especially ones that are so intimate, like how, now that it's published, like, is there anything that you're anxious about? I feel that we know so much about your marriage. We know so much about your family. And, I imagine that some of that is it's a little disconcerting, even though you knew what you signed up for when you started writing it.
I mean, did sort of like it's a great question, and it's one that has been dawning on me in this like Groundhog's Day way. Every day I'm like, oh right. The when I was writing the book, I was writing what came naturally, what sort of flowed out of me. You know, this is my truth. This is what I'm writing. The idea that other people would eventually read it, besides my editor Robin Desser, who's wonderful, and I hope maybe she's tuned in, zoomed in. The idea that anyone outside a very small circle of people would read it was not in my mind, which is not very smart. Or I really, but perhaps was good to leave me unguarded and allow me to write what I really felt was worth writing. I think if I had understood how I would recoil at the idea of strangers understanding my private life, I probably would have left things out of the book that ultimately I'm glad remain in the book, because it's a truer portrait of my grandmother and of myself and of our relationship to each other. My husband, Charlie, read a very early draft of the book. Poor Charlie was like, I wrote a paragraph. Can I read it to you? And he was like, yes. In reading the early draft of the book, he was like, okay, so just so you know, I'm in this book. And I was like, no, this is about me and my grandma. And he's like, this is a book about us. And I was like, oh, right. And so I wanted to be sensitive to him, the love of my life, while also being true to a big through line in my grandma's relationship with me, which was she meddles in every aspect of my life. So I think the three of us, me, the ghost of my grandma, and my very alive husband, came to an understanding that the way that that our dynamic would be portrayed in the book would ultimately be true and leave everyone feeling justice was served.
I mean, I think, the thing, I've talked to you about this book before and how just like meaningful it's been to me. I think that, a thing that I hope resonates with so many people who read it is that it's also really a book about processing your grief, which is not a conversation that we are adept at having ever at all. It's like I think that in Western culture, and certainly in, a lot of religious cultures too, when you are mourning, you're almost dead to the world. It's like you go in your own and you figure out your how you feel about your feelings, and then you're ready to come back in society. And I think that it's useful for some things, and I think that for other things it just does a real disservice to people who are grieving. And what I really found hearing you like process your relationship with your grandmother was something that was an emotion that felt so accessible. I'm like, yes, like everyone wants to talk about their person who is no longer here and wants things to remember them by. And so I'm just like curious if you could talk a little bit about that, about your, about this body of work really as being one that is helpful to people who are grieving.
I'm glad that it can be read that way. I think the big concern that I had in writing this book, and I think many writers of nonfiction could relate to this, is this going to be relatable? Is this self-indulgent and serving no purpose except for my own processing of my own life? Like basically who cares? And to know that me providing a sort of roadmap through my own grief is something that could be extrapolated for other people and useful as a tool for other people to maybe see their own experience through is extremely heartening. Just like for the ego to know that like I didn't do this foolish thing where I made a display of myself and and it has no bearing on anybody else's experience, to know that it's resonating with people and it's creating space for a conversation about grief is very important to me, and extremely validating, because I think I felt so crazy after losing her, and so isolated and like foreign, to the rest of the non-grieving world when this happened. And I think the shock of grief and the loneliness of grief is something that, that our culture does have trouble with. That when we've talked about this before, there's the idea that you have to be shut away. There's the idea that that you have to be confined away from society just so as not to be an unpleasant presence in the sort of the status quo American life. And I think I hope that when people read the later passages of this of this book, they're able to see that grief is away from, that grief is something that that can happen even after the loss of somebody very old. It's a process that made me feel really disconnected from other people, and to know that in writing about it I can be connected to other people is really powerful, and I'm so glad. And so I hope that this book is able to reach people in times of grief the way that I wish I had somebody to reach me, to say this is okay.
Oh, that's so lovely, Bess. We have a lot of questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to start asking those in no particular order. Someone in the audience, hello, Symphony Space audience, we appreciate you. It's so funny. It's so lonely being here, but knowing that someone is writing in is making me feel very held. So thank you for spending your 7 p.m. hour with us. Bess, someone wants to know, how was it revisiting the old voicemails from your grandmother?
So I didn't revisit them until after the book was written. So all of the voicemails in the book are from memory and from remembrances of other people who have heard the voicemails that she left me. I had to play them all back. I have them on my phone here. I mean, this is a benefit of, I couldn't do this at on stage at Symphony Space, but you can all see it's just grandma. Ooh, I'm not gonna actually play it. But it's just my grandma's voicemail still on my phone. And I had all of these and have all of these saved. And when the book was ready to be published, somebody at Penguin Random House said, well, how do you feel about releasing some of the voicemails as audiobook accompaniments, since they're a great sort of audible element? And I said, sure, totally. I have no problem going back and listening to the voicemails. I will do this. I will find the best ones. And I was so dramatic. I had my husband and baby leave the room. I was like, I need the room. This is going to be really hard for me. And Charlie was like, of course. And I sat there and I took a deep breath and I put my earbuds in and I hit play. And within 2 minutes, I was laughing my ass off. I was laughing hysterically. They are so funny. There is one that is just you would think it's a Yogi Berra, Woody Allen, but it's it's something, it feels like a classic line. The voicemail is just, Bessie, it's grandma. I hear you have laryngitis. Call me back. It's like, what? And so in listening to them afterwards, I remembered how hilariously, uproariously funny she was, and the experience was so positive and happy, and I felt like a melodramatic fool.
Well, someone wants to know what the hardest part of writing this book was.
That's a good and hard question, because it's a difficult question to answer, because there were a lot of hard parts to writing this or any book. With this book specifically, I think revising was hard. I think a writer of anything can probably relate to this, or anyone in any artistic field could probably relate to this. When you finish your product, when you finish your work, you think well, that's it, and it's done, and congratulations to me, I've accomplished this. And I think in realizing that the book needed more, and I ended up adding 50 pages to the book between the first manuscript and
Wow.
the draft. And it was really hard to go back to what I thought was a complete look at her life, and add the stories about my grandfather, add the whole section about the Met, something that I had forgotten. I ended up opening up her life again, and so it was hard both as a writer and as somebody who had sort of closed that chapter, not to be corny, but on grief. Like I had to sort of reopen the grief and the book and examine the relationship more and do more sort of personal excavation. And so it was really hard going from send to open draft and typing. But yeah, so that was the hardest for me.
Yeah, I mean, since you bring it up, one of the most memorable exchanges in the book is this part where you are, at the Met as a child, and your grandmother asks you to count all the women artists. And, in true art or in Met fashion, there is only one. And so I'm just like wondering if there were a lot of moments like that in your childhood.
Yeah, I mean, my grandma was an activist and a feminist, an ardent feminist, and she would use that word from when I was a very young age. She would tell me, like, "You are a feminist, and and you are just as good as any man." She would say, "What would a man do?" When I was at career crossroads, she she was somebody who helped me shape my own sense of social justice and activism, which is bizarre and unlikely because she was a woman of such immense privilege. This was somebody who lived a very, very different type of life than my parents and myself growing up, and my brother. And she was sort of this woman in a gilded marble apartment, and we were in one a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 kids, in a brownstone on 84th between Columbus and Amsterdam, and it was just a very different life. And yet she was this daughter of immigrants, this woman who was born during right before the Great Depression, and then grew up in post-Depression America. And I think she knew poverty and she knew suffering, and she never forgot that as she gained in like wealth and status and social standing. And I think her perspective really shaped who I am, and the way that I interact with the world politically and socially. I'm really glad that I was raised by such a strong-minded and strong a woman with such strong convictions and sense of social justice.
I love that. Someone wants to know how your extended family responded to the book.
I mean, to my face, like, who knows? I know that you'll have to track down and ask them, but this is a book. The author's note really speaks to how I feel about that, and it was something that I was super self-conscious about writing it. I was like, well, this is in no way speaking for Bobby Bell's relationship to anyone else but me and my mother,
Yeah.
but really to me. And my grandma had 7 grandchildren, and she loved each one of them equally and fiercely. Our relationship was definitely special. She was there to help raise me, and so that gave us a closeness that gave me a certain perspective into her life, and certainly her stories were a part of my life as much as my own. But she, this book really is just about us, and I know that each one of her grandchildren had a special and deep and lovely relationship with her, and I look forward to reading their books where I'm not mentioned.
Someone wants to know if you could share one part of the book with your grandmother, which one would you choose?
Ooh. Um, I think I would choose the plaza section to
Mm.
share with her. Um, and because I want her to know what a delightful treat that was to me, and that I still remember. I wish I had thanked her more for that kind of experience when she was alive. Um, and I think I would share that section because it's both a lovely memory and a and my attempt at a repayment of gratitude. It ends with me going back to the Plaza Hotel in modern New York, and having tea there on her birthday and a Kir Royale. And I wish that was the moment that I wished she was there most fiercely. That was a moment right in the eye of the storm of grief that I needed to just beam her in. And so I wish I could share that with her, and take her back to the place where she belongs, which is the palm court of a fabulous hotel, having the drink of her dreams. Yeah.
Oh man, I that is making me really emotional.
Me too.
Oh, someone says, Bess, what do you think makes the relationship between children and grandparents fundamentally different? As a new mother, how will you bridge the gap between your parents and Bobby's parenting styles?
Yeah, that's a great question. The I don't have the explanation for it. I'm not a family behavioral psychologist, but in my like case study of one, and purely empirical reasoning, I I think that a grandparent is not somebody who has to endure um, a child. They're just somebody who gets to swoop in and treat a child. And I think that like distance is something that creates a bond that is in its weakness much stronger, because you're not dealing with like, eat your goddamn carrots, you have to go to bed, why is your bed not made? The minutia of parenting, I think, can get in the way of the fantasy of a relationship, and so the relationship just gets to be fantasy in a grandparent grandchild relationship in this really preserved way. And I think that in the relationship with my grandmother, there's a moment in the book that sort of encapsulates that for me, which is I would stand ready, all dressed up in my best dress, just waiting at the door for her to come whisk me on some adventure. And my mom was doing the dishes and scrubbing my like, chicken nugget debris off a plate in the same room as I was, this jerk in a little Laura Ashley floral. My style has not evolved very much, but standing there. So I think the specialness of that relationship is in part due to the lack of true intimacy of a parent-child relationship. And with my baby, um, my parents have taken on this super larger than life love toward him. Like it's the my parents, I think it's also perfectly timed at the point where they're most sick of me, like my bullshit. The like 30 something years of having to deal with your child, you're sick of them, and then finally they create this like perfect new thing that you just get to love, and it isn't like asking you to just like, can you just read something because you might sue me for it. Like the baby isn't dealing with that, so they get to have this do-over with a pure new thing that they don't have to clean its dishes. I'm the one cleaning my son's bottles. My mom just gets to be fun lady. And so I can speak for them. They're loving being grandparents.
Oh, well, because it is the elephant in the room, someone wants to know how it's been to release a book at such a weird time.
Yeah, no, it is the elephant in the completely empty room for a book event.
Welcome to my empty room.
Well, look at this packed crowd. I mean, truly behind me is a testament. You might see the yoga pants that I'm wearing, but there's boxes from Penguin Random House behind me in my office of books that I was supposed to sign, but due to that being a potential disease vector, I of course will not and cannot sign them and hurt people with them. Um, the the This is a horrific time for the planet, and people are far more affected by this pandemic than by authors. We are not the victims of this by any stretch of the imagination, and there is no but to that. It just I consider myself very, very lucky to be okay right now when a lot of people aren't. And the thing about releasing a book like this in a pandemic is that this is a very comforting book. I think it's also a book about being um, unjustly separated from a person you love, which I think is relatable right now. I also think that it's a book that deals with the idea of rehumanizing the elderly in a way that's really important right now. That the sort of if this book gives insight into an older woman's psyche in a time of desperation, good. That is a conversation that I think is needed. And so I think this is an oddly appropriate book for not just comfort quarantine reading for readers, but also as sort of as a as like a testament to the people who are hardest hit by this pandemic, the elderly, and the people who are separated and isolated during this pandemic. So yeah, I hope it's reaching people, even though this is not the typical book event or typical author experience. It's a really profoundly important one to me, knowing that this book is helping people just get through it and to allow people to feel something outside of their own justifiably stoked paranoia and fear and dread. That's good. That's my job. I've done my job as an author and as a writer if I'm helping you just feel something other than the inside of your own mind for even just a few hours. So yeah, I hope it's helping.
It is definitely helping. It has helped me, and I hope that everyone who is watching us tonight, if you haven't already read it, please pick up Nobody Will Tell You This But Me. It truly is, I keep saying it to you, but I really mean it. It is the perfect read for right now. I know that everyone is having a lot of trouble like concentrating on reading. It is hard to, it's just hard to think about anything else but the news and what's going on, but life always goes on, and people that we love will keep dying, and people that we love will keep being remembered. And I think about your book so much as something that reminds us about the relationships that are important and thinking about that throughout time. So Bess, thank you so much for your time. Nobody Will Tell You This But Me is available wherever you buy books, and we would love it if you would support your local indie bookstores right now. And thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you, Symphony Space, for having me and having us.
I know. And the Symphony Spaces Facebook page will be hosting a lot more of these, so please tune in. We had a blast. Good luck to the next people. Bye, Bess.
Bye. Stay
Bye,
safe.
everyone at home. Stay safe and stay healthy.